In the summer of 1947, a British lawyer named Cyril Ratcliffe was handed a map, a pencil, and 6 weeks to draw borders. 6 weeks. That's less time than what I took to prepare and finally start this YouTube channel. And you know what's worse? Ratcliffe had never been to India before in his life. He had no training in geography, no understanding of local cultures, languages, or rivers he was about to slice through. And in those 6 weeks, this man drew the line that split British India into two new countries, India and Pakistan. He split rivers down the middle. He split farmland from the cities that depended on it. He split villages so badly in some places that a family's front door ended up in one country and backyard in another. That's how Pakistan was born. By every rule of geography we talk about on this channel, a defensible border, connected interior, resources lining up with population, Pakistan should have collapsed within a decade. Instead, it has nuclear weapons. It has the sixth largest army on earth and a population of over 240 million people. So, how does a country drawn on a deadline by a stranger with a pencil survive this long? And more importantly, how much longer can it? That's what we're figuring out today. Hi, I'm Rag, I'm a lawyer, an entrepreneur, and I'm very passionate about geopolitics. I once dreamed of becoming a diplomat, spent years studying international relations, geography, and the power games nations play. Life took me somewhere else, but the knowledge never left. If anything, it sharpened. And it completely changed how I see the world. So now, when a headline drops or a debate breaks out at dinner, I'm not just reacting, I'm seeing the moves behind it. The history, the incentives, the reason it's happening now and not 10 years ago. That's what I want to give you. Because the world isn't random. It's a strategy game being played in real time. And I'm here to break down the board for you, one video at a time. Welcome to the lore of power. Let's play. Let's actually sit with how chaotic this birth was. Because most retellings skip past it too fast. And I feel that's a disservice to what actually happened. When the line was finally announced, which was 2 days after India and Pakistan had already officially become independent. So nobody even knew which country they were technically living in for 48 hours. Roughly 14 to 18 million people had to move. Hindus and Sikhs moving toward India, Muslims moving toward Pakistan, on foot, by train, and this was in the middle of the monsoon season. It is, by most estimates, the largest mass migration in human history that wasn't caused by war or natural disaster. It was caused by a pencil. Now, I want to be honest with you about what that migration actually looked like. Because the scale of it is almost impossible to hold in our head as just a number. Trains became one of the defining horrors of partition. Survivors and historians describe what came to be known as ghost trains. Carriages that left one city full of people and arrived the other end carrying only the dead. Mobs would stop trains along the route and kill everyone aboard based on their religion alone. People who lived through it as children, now in their 80s and 90s, still describe watching this happen. Watching corpses pulled from carriages. Watching neighbors who had lived beside each other for generations turn on one another within days. Entire families disappeared and were never found. Tens of thousands of women were abducted during this period. Some women facing capture chose to take their own lives rather than be taken. These aren't isolated stories. They are lived experiences of millions of ordinary people who simply woke up one day and found out the place they had always called home now belonged to a different country, defended by people who used to be their neighbors. Historians still argue over the exact death toll. Estimates range from 200,000 to as high as 2 million. And the fact that we still don't have a precise number 80 years later says everything about how chaotic and undocumented this violence really was. Nobody was keeping records. Nobody was protecting the people on the ground. The British administration that drew this border had largely already withdrawn its own forces, leaving local police and what remained of colonial authority completely unable to contain what followed. This wasn't a clean handover of territory. It was one of the largest, least prepared for humanitarian catastrophes of the 20th century. That's the human cost behind every border, every river, and every statistic we are about to walk through in this video. It's worth remembering that as we go. Okay, here's the part of the story that sounds so absurd, I promise you'll think I'm making this up. For its first 24 years of existence, Pakistan wasn't one connected piece of land. It was two separate chunks of territory over 1,000 miles apart, with Indian territory sitting directly in between them. West Pakistan, where the capital and power were, and East Pakistan, which is the modern day Bangladesh, where over half the country's actual population lived. In risk, your territories need to connect each other to actually function as an empire. Armies move between adjacent territories. Reinforcements flow through connected land. A split empire is almost unplayable, and Pakistan was a split empire. Government officials had to fly over Indian airspace just to get from one half of their country to the other. They had different languages, Urdu dominant in the west, Bengali in the east. They had different cultures, different priorities, and the Western government quite frankly treated the eastern half like a distant, less important cousin, despite it holding most of the population. That imbalance didn't stay a quiet resentment. In 1971, it broke the country apart. East Pakistan fought for and won its independence, becoming Bangladesh. That war and everything that happened during it is its own enormous story. One with its own profound human cost that deserves a full episode of its own, not a passing mention here. I'll come back to it properly. For today, here's the point that matters. Before we even get to modern Pakistan's other problems, it had already lost an entire half of itself once. That's how shaky this foundation was from day one. This is the Durand Line, drawn by the British in 1893, even before partition existed as an idea, separating what's now Pakistan from Afghanistan. It cuts straight through Pashtun tribal territory, putting millions of the exact same ethnic group on both sides of an international border. Afghanistan has never fully recognized this border as legitimate. Not in 1893, not now. As far as many Afghans are concerned, that line was drawn by a colonial power that had no business splitting their own people in half for administrative convenience. Afghanistan argues the line arbitrarily divided the Pashtun and the Baloch tribal communities, and has historically advocated for a Pashtunistan, an independent Pashtun state, or those areas joining Afghanistan instead of Pakistan. As of the time I am recording this, Pakistan and Afghanistan's government are formally engaged in what Pakistan's own defense minister has called an open war. Airstrikes, artillery, and ground clashes have been happening along the exact border for months. This is one of the most significant military confrontations either country has been a part of in decades, and it traces directly back to a line a British official drew in 1893 that one side has never agreed to and the other has never been willing to redraw. And now the eastern border, the Ratcliffe Line. When partition happened in 1947, princely states like Kashmir were given a choice of which country to join. Kashmir's population was majority Muslim, but its ruler was Hindu, and he initially wanted to remain independent rather than choose either side. Within months, armed groups crossed in from Pakistan, so the ruler appealed to India for military help and signed an agreement bringing Kashmir into India. Pakistan has never accepted that agreement as legitimate, and that disagreement triggered the first of what would become four wars between the two countries: 1947, 1965, 1971, and 1999, three of which were directly fought over this territory. Both countries have spent close to 80 years building their entire national position around this question. The human cost has been immense and it hasn't stopped. So Pakistan sits boxed in on two sides. A western frontier Afghanistan has never recognized, and an eastern one that has cost tens of thousands of lives and shows no sign of fully resolving. Both are borders it didn't fully choose, and both remain unresolved decades later. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside Pakistan's borders, because this is where most coverage of the country completely misses the plot. Pakistan isn't really one nation. It's four major regions stitched together under one single flag: Punjab, Sindh, Baluchistan, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Punjab, Sindh, Baluchistan, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And each one comes with its own language, its own history, and in some cases, its own resentment towards the others. Punjab alone holds more than half the country's population and most of its political and military power. Balochistan is the one I want to slow down on because it isn't old history, it's happening right now while you're watching this video. Balochistan is Pakistan's largest province by land, but it's also the poorest. It sits on enormous reserves of natural gas, copper, and gold, including one of the largest undeveloped copper and gold deposits on earth. And for decades, many Baloch have watched that wealth get extracted and shipped out while their own province remains the least developed in the country. That resentment has turned into an active low-level insurgency that's been running on and off since Pakistan's founding. And it has sharply escalated in just the last couple of years. In 2025 alone, separatist fighters claimed responsibility for hundreds of attacks, including hijacking an entire passenger train and holding more than 350 people hostage for over a day. Human rights organizations have documented thousands of cases of people, including students, activists, ordinary young men and women, disappearing, with families saying they were taken by security forces and never seen again. What I want you to take away is this. This is not a settled internal matter. It's an active, ongoing conflict, and it's one of the clearest examples of why Pakistan's internal map doesn't naturally hold together as one shared identity. This is also quietly the real explanation for why Pakistan has bounced between civilian governments and military rule so many times since 1947. When a country's internal geography doesn't naturally produce a shared identity, something has to hold the pieces together anyway. And historically, that something has usually been the army, not consensus. Now here's where Pakistan's story stops being chaotic and starts being genuinely impressive. And then right at the end becomes urgent in a way that's still unfolding as I record this. The Indus River and its tributaries irrigate the overwhelming majority of Pakistan's farmland. This is one of the largest irrigation networks ever built by human beings. A system the British started and Pakistan massively expanded after independence. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. The Indus doesn't start in Pakistan. It starts in the Himalayas and flows through territory contested with India before it ever reaches Pakistani soil. For over 6 decades, it was managed by something genuinely remarkable. The Indus Waters Treaty, signed in 1960, which split the river system between India and Pakistan. The pact survived 3 wars without either side seriously threatening to tear it up. It was one of the most durable water sharing agreements in the world. But following a terrorist attack in April 2025 in Pahalgam that killed 26 people, India suspended the treaty entirely. This is the first time either country has done that in 65 years. How does it matter? Roughly 80% of Pakistan's population lives inside the river basin, and the agreement that has governed it for over 60 years no longer has both countries' full participation. This is an active, unresolved situation between two nuclear powered countries. Now stack the population math on top. Pakistan went from roughly 30 million people at independence to over 240 million today. That's nearly an eightfold increase, almost entirely dependent on the same river system that was already at capacity decades ago, and is now also caught in the middle of the most serious bilateral dispute over its future. So here's a question worth asking. With borders this disputed and an internal map this fractured, why hasn't the rest of the world just written Pakistan off? Because of one port, Gwadar. In the China episode, we talked about the Malacca dilemma. China's energy supply traveling through a single choke point it doesn't control, with America's navy effectively able to dominate it in a real conflict. Gwadar is China's attempt to build a backdoor around that exact vulnerability. It's a deep water port, linked by road and rail straight up to China's own western border, letting goods and oil move over land instead of the strait that worries the Chinese so much. But the story has changed a lot from how it's usually told. Of roughly 90 projects originally planned under this corridor, only about 38 have actually been completed. Chinese investment specifically in Gwadar adds up to less than $1 billion, a small fraction of what was promised. And new Chinese investment has been dropping sharply for years now. Why? Largely security reasons. Since 2021, there have been more than a dozen attacks specifically targeting Chinese workers in projects in Pakistan. China hasn't abandoned the idea, but it has clearly grown far more cautious about pouring money into a port surrounded by exactly the kind of instability we have spent the whole video walking through. Pakistan's geography gave it a genuinely valuable card to offer the world, a backdoor around China's biggest vulnerabilities. But playing that card well requires the kind of internal stability Pakistan has struggled to provide. And right now, the instability is costing it the very investment that card was supposed to attract. Now, here's the twist that changed everything for Pakistan's standing in the world. And it traces directly back to that 1971 war we talked about earlier. After losing half its territory that year, Pakistan's government concluded it could never risk being this militarily outmatched. So it started a nuclear weapons program in 1972. It was driven partly by defeat and partly by India's own nuclear research. For over 2 decades, Pakistan developed that capability quietly. And then in May 1998, India conducted a fresh round of nuclear tests, and Pakistan's response came within 2 weeks. Pakistan showed its cards to the world, and suddenly, a country with internal fractures, contested borders, and a relatively modest economy had something that instantly put it in the same conversation as the world's most powerful nations. That single decision in 1998 is arguably the most consequential move Pakistan has ever made. It didn't fix the water stress. It didn't fix Balochistan. It didn't fix the Durand line. But it guaranteed that whatever else happened, nobody was going to simply erase Pakistan from the map the way you might expect a country this internally fragile to eventually be erased. So how does a country drawn on a deadline by a stranger survive this long? 3 things compensated for the disaster of its birth. First, the Indus River system. It has managed to feed a population that's grown eightfold since independence, even strained and now politically contested as it is. Most countries facing this kind of growth on this little farmable land would have faced a real famine by now. Pakistan somehow mostly hasn't. Second, Pakistan's military. It has stayed cohesive enough to prevent the kind of total state collapse we have seen in other countries born from hasty colonial borders. Add nuclear weapons into that mix and you have got an institution that simply will not let the country disappear, even when politics on top of it gets chaotic. And third, Pakistan's geography. It has made it useful enough that outside powers have never fully walked away from it, but never stable enough for anyone to fully commit either. The US relationship has been a roller coaster. Investments flowing and stopping with whatever Washington needed at that time. China is still its largest weapon supplier, but it has grown far more cautious with its money, exactly as we saw with Gwadar. So the real answer is this: Pakistan has never been important enough to abandon and never stable enough to fully trust. It somehow survives in that gap. That's the whole story. 78 years of survival with none of the underlying tensions solved. Water stress, provincial resentment, two unresolved borders. These aren't fading with time. They are structural and they are active right now while you're watching this video. Pakistan is not a failed state, but it's not a triumph of geography either. It's a triumph of pure improvisation through institutions, alliances, and nuclear leverage holding together a map that was never designed to hold together at all. Geography gave Pakistan a deadline, and it's still finding new ways to outrun it. One more thing before you go: two continents, same sun, same planet. One built empires that spanned the globe. The other has some of the richest natural resources on earth and still struggles to develop. It's not effort, it's not culture. It's a geographic lottery nobody talks about. One brutal accident of nature that decided the winner before either of them had a flag. That's next. If this changed how you see the headlines, like and subscribe to the Lore of Power. See you there.